Hallo und herzlich willkommen zurück zu einer weiteren Folge Witch on the Holy Night. Wenn ich mich gerade richtig erinnere, wurde ja Sojiro eine ich komme jetzt gerade nicht mehr auf den vernünftigen deutschen Begriff für Study Session aufgebrummt von Aoko. Und ja, und das in Aokos Zimmer, wo beide aber auf dem Schlauch standen, auf dem Schlauch stehen gerade aktuell, was das angeht. Naja, egal. 2 hours passed. Then, as the clock neared 11, Aoko's speed and concentration began to slip. Seeing his window for opportunity, Sojiro seized the moment to strike up a conversation.
ちょっといいかな。ん？
何?
She spoke hesitantly, not bothering to turn to face him. She continued to flip the pages of her textbook, albeit at a slower speed than before.
この3日間、青崎たちの夕食事情を見てきたけど、君たちの食事はいつもああなのか？
そうだけど、おかしい？
そう言われると困るな。ただ学校じゃみんな楽しそうだった。誰かと食事をとるってことはああいう風になることだって思ってた。だからもしかすると。
もしかしないわよ。別にあんたのせいでアリスと話さないわけじゃないわ。私たちはいつもああだから。
Aoko spoke calmly with her back still turned, seemingly unaware of what he was getting at.
張り詰めた食卓だな。青崎とアリスは仲がいいと思ってたのに。
She neither confirmed nor denied his statement. She was, however, surprised by the disappointed tone in which he had made it.
張り詰めた食卓っていうのは合ってるわね。アリスが何回あんたの飲み物にメスカリンを入れてたかなんてもう覚えてないし、昨日なんか堂々とサラダの中に7かまどなんか混ざってるし。
I can't remember how many times she has put mescaline.
ほんと、あの子何考えてるんだろう。
A bitter smile spread across her face in reminiscence. The pages of her textbook continued to turn.
メスカリン?
Ja, das habe ich mich gerade auch gefragt. Der Begriff sagt mir irgendwie gerade nicht.
サボテンから取れるアルカロイドよ。アリスが使う以上、ただの幻覚剤じゃないでしょうけどね。と、私はこんなもんでいっか。
With that, she slammed shut her fourth textbook of the night. After having scarcely changed position through the night, she finally turned in her chair to face him.
さあ、今度はあんたを仕込まなくちゃね。今日の4科目の答案、実に宗十郎らしい出来栄えでそっと押しそうになったわ。
Her tone was light, but her gaze was heavy as she stared at Sojiro seated cross-legged on the
建
floor.
国、地理、数学、電子工学。
Okay, ja, da kannst du nichts erwarten, weil...
あの調子であと2日続けたら、冬休みが消えるのは当然でしょうね。そうなると困るのは私なのよ、実際。
いや、俺も困るぞ。休みなのに学校に行くのはなんか気が乗らない。
So calmly corrected her.
そりゃあ私のセリフだ。あんたが学校に行くってことは必然こっちまでとばっちりが来るっての。
Wieder der Gesichtsausdruck, ich finde ihn so super. All she could think about as much as she tried not to was Mr. Yamashiro and his annoying grin.
それ以前に私の目が黒いうちはオール赤なんてやつは許さない。本来なら少年から叩き直すところだけど、ま、あんたはいろいろ事情があるからとりあえず点数だけで勘弁してあげる。私もテストは一夜漬けで片付ける方だから、あんた一人仕込むのにそう時間はかからないだろうし。
Sojito's expression openly soared in response to her declaration. It was obvious he did not think he needed her meddling in his
あん
studies.
たね、苦労するのは私とあなた、どっちだと思う？
Cedric got the feeling that it would be him, but he nodded slowly nonetheless. Then again, it would probably take more effort on her part than on his, and in any case, he knew there was no way to talk her out of it.
この度はご迷惑をおかけします。
Cedric summarily bowed his head to show gratitude and willingness to work.
よろしい。安心なさい。私だって鬼じゃないから、別に平均点狙うってわけでもなし。予定通りこなしていけば3時には眠れるわよ。
She nodded with satisfaction, pleased by his studious attitude. He had plenty of obstacles ahead of him, but that sense of humility might be enough to see him through.
って 何仏心出してるんだ私。いいしずきくん、この後頼られちゃたまんないから釘刺しておくけど、私がマンツーマンで誰かを仕込むなんてこと、これはあくまで異例中の異例だって覚えておいてね。
She spoke more to convince herself than him, but his expression still darkened. It made one want to hang a side around his neck that read, "Please take me home," like an abandoned pet. Orko chided herself for being so soft. For some reason, in that moment she recalled that it had been raining the day they met each other. Time passed like the falling grains of an hourglass. Ah, jetzt habe ich gecheckt, was das...
結局
Jetzt habe ich gecheckt, was die Anspielung mit dem Regen war. Das ist halt so dieses typische Trope, dass man irgendwie ein ausgesetztes, einsames Haustier irgendwie findet, während es regnet und quasi den Regenschirm dann darüber hält und es dann mitnimmt. Darauf war die Anspielung, da bin ich mir jetzt ziemlich sicher. Arko squinted as light poured through the window, and she downed another cup of tea. She had lost count of exactly how many she had drank long ago.
一晩かかったね、大崎。
And it only took the full night. Cedric picked up on what she left unspoken. Orko had used up all her pep. In staying up all night, but also in shouting at him. He looked pale and uncomfortable, in just as he had all night long.
ええ、甘く見てたわ、あんたのことを。
だから褒めても何も出ないって。
ある意味褒めるに値するかもね。
She was at the end of her rope, but she could not help the bit of pride that swelled up in her. His lack of even the most basic comprehension was shocking, even taking into account his upbringing in the wilderness. His ability was that of a middle school student, and that was being generous. Preparing him for action by teaching him new concepts and ideas was a waste of time. Rote memorization was his only hope of passing. Everything he memorized could collapse like a house of cards afterwards for all she cared, so long as he remembered for his exams. Assuming he had the capacity to be a good student in the first place had been her mistake. It took all night to cover the content for just 4 exams, and she still did not feel confident he could apply what he so earnestly tried to memorize.
でもね、真面目なのはいいことだけど、あんた暗記するのに時間かかりすぎ。
そこは多めに見てほしい。今まで頭より体で覚えることのが多かったんだ。
Orko let out an exasperated sigh. Naturally, physical progress mattered more in mountain life than the intellectual kind, but still.
まあいいわ。これで山城からあんたの成績について相談されることもないでしょうし。紅茶もう一杯入れてくれる？
Cedric stood up and obeyed as Arko stretched her aging back. She had apparently brought the tea bags in bulk, so there were still plenty to use.
まったく無駄遣いだな。
He spoke under his breath so she wouldn't hear. It made him somehow happy to see her so tired and unfocused after the grueling all-night lessons she had given him. It did not cross his mind that the excess tea bags, far from being an indulgent purchase, were purchased intentionally to sustain them through the night. A relaxed expression came across Orko's face as she watched him, naive and peaceful as could be.
悪くないけど、せめてリーフティーで入れられるように仕込まなくちゃダメかな。
Seeming to have overheard her not so inner monologue, Soju made to face her.
やっぱり味は違うのか？
違う違う、もう全然。正直私はどうでもいいんだけど、アリスはね、かなりお茶にはうるさいよ。そうだ、宗十郎、アリスとうまくいってる？
Orko cheerfully slumped over the table, now covered with textbooks and scribbled notes. Soju watched her with a hint of resentment in his eyes.
彼女と会えるのは食事の時だけで、食事と言ったらあれだろ？どうやって仲良くなれって言うんだ？
そう？私は十分脈ありだと思ったけど、そっちはアリスを怖がってないし、アリスはそっちを追い出す理由を見つけようと躍起になってるし、いい条件よ、これって。
全然わからないな。あの子とこっちの関係は遊園地前の青崎と俺の関係と同じじゃないか。一体どこがいい条件なんだ？
とりあえず反目し合ってはいないでしょ。一方通行の関係だけど、それはそれ。アリスにしちゃ上出来っていうか、理由を探している時点で可能性ありってね。あの子は反感に応えることが癖になっちゃってるから、大抵相手を自滅させちゃうのよ。
Yeah, ominous words only confuse Cedric
知って
further.
しまえば単純な話なんだけどね。ただ
Whether or not he could put it into practice was another story altogether.
難しいよ、青崎は。
He carried the teacups back to the table as he spoke. Aoko picked hers up and took a sip, as if to dispel her exhaustion.
でも確かに君の言う通りだ。俺はまだあの子の顔しか知らない。クオンジ・アリスという名前すら定かじゃないのは。
He followed Aoko's lead and took a sip of his own. His cup contained not tea but plain hot water.
あの子のこと教えてほしい？
Aoko scrutinized him carefully as she said. Most boys would have been captivated by her gaze in that
い
moment.
や、そういうことは本人に聞いてあげるべきだと思う。
But he ignored her and stared straight ahead, as if speaking directly to Alice
そう
herself.
ね。ほんと、あんたってアリス好みの対応をするわ。ねえ、前から気になってたけど、客室でアリスに何を言ったの？いくら私との約束とはいえ、あの子が部外者を半日も放置するなんてありえないのよ。
He thought back to that moment. He could recall only 2 or 3 words he had exchanged with Alice after awakening in the guest room. He did not recall the conversation being anything special, but he could not bring himself to casually share it with Aoko now. After all,
ねえ、どんなセリフであの子の気を変えたの？
Aoko eagerly pressed him for answers. Cedric frowned, unsure of what to say. He did not know what the interaction had been like for Alice, but for him it had felt special, sacred almost. The question was why and for whom was he so concerned?
ほら、白状しなさいってば。隠し事なんて似合わないわよ。
Her disconcerting smile moved even closer. Cedric did not look like he was able to stay silent much longer, as he would eventually come to realize Aoko Azaki had a sometimes troubling propensity to gossip.
まあ、あの子と何を話したかは言わないけど、今の青崎に比べれば花もロマンもなかったのだけは確かかな。さっきまでは青崎が鬼みたいだったからいいもんだなって気がつかなかった。
He stared directly into her eyes as he spoke. Aoko nearly leaped out of her seat in panic. Now that he pointed it out, she realized the bodies were practically touching.
仕方ないでしょ。この方が効率良かったんだから。あんた横にいないとすぐ間違えるし。
Aoko stood up as she laughed back at him.
そうだね。なんか昔みたいで久しぶりに集中できた。これが異例中の異例っていうのが。
余裕あるじゃない。その分じゃ今日のテストだけじゃなく、アリスとの話し合いもうまくいきそうね。
あ、それはもちろん。
This cool response caught her off guard, and for a moment she was at a loss for words. She meant it sarcastically, and yet the response hit with a warm smile.
方針変更だ。まずは近くで話しかけてみるよ。嫌なことはいずれ終わるって分かったから。
Aoko remained in a state of silent shock as he spoke and rose to his feet. He could not help but feel a reluctant respect for what seemed to be his newfound confidence and competence.
とりあえず今日は一人で帰ってアリスと話してみる。青崎は放課後生徒会だろ？
He was right. It was their last meeting before the winter break. Normally, he would have waited until the meeting ended, or else gone straight to his part-time job. This was part of Aoko's plan to make sure he and Alice were never alone in the mansion together.
まさかあんた一人でアリスとやり合うつもりなの？
別にやり合うつもりはないぞ。し合っても勝てないだろう、アリスには。
His reply made the complete sense, which floored her.
でも青崎がいたら話が複雑になるのは目に見えてるんだ。そんなわけで今日はゆっくり飛び丸の相手でもしてて。
本気？
He felt like he was being tested but nodded nonchalantly nonetheless. Knowing how grave the situation really was, Aoko was not sure how to respond to his apparent lack of concern. The morning light coming through the window marked a stark contrast between the two, which stood bathed in light, which lurked in the darkness. That went without saying. The silence lasted for only a brief moment. Staring at him gravely, she said,
"So, なら止めはしないわ."
That was all she said. Her dry tone hid the significance of the pregnant silence, not revealing the slightest sign of discord.
なんか怒ってないか、大崎。
Are you sure you're not angry?
それで何か考えはあるの？下手な考えは通じないわよ、あの子。
Sojo furrowed his brow in deep thought. He knew it would be hard to get close to her. Through talk alone, in fact, it felt nearly impossible.
言葉で落ちない奴は物で釣れ。
Kinomi had been the voice of wisdom and folly for him countless times in the past. Incidentally, Kinomi had been referring to Aoko at the time he shared that pearl of wisdom. But Soji had the distinct impression that trying to buy Aosaki's kindness with gifts would not end well.
だいたいアリスの趣味もわからないじゃないか。考えてみると、今の自分と彼女はまるで接点がない。
Zeit crossed his arms at the loss.
いつものことだけど、何も考えてなかったわけね。
うん。でもまあ、あれこれ考えなくてもいいと思う。アリスにはあれこれ説明するとか、分かってもらおうとか、そういうんじゃなくて、なんていうか。
He pondered intently as he tried to put his vague thoughts into something concrete, but he did not spend much time in thought. With a nod, he
要
concluded.
は、俺が彼女を好きかどうかってことじゃないか。
He articulated that which is often so hard to say, with surprisingly clarity and calm. It was certainly a prerequisite for the task he hoped to achieve. He had no hope of making her appreciate him with words, or with acts of giving in with the expectations of reciprocation. He simply wished to get to know her better because he liked her. That was his honest, uncontrived intention, and it reflected the purity of his heart. But whether that was in his best interest or not was another story altogether. Calculation and compromise, selfishness and conflict. Purity such as his often irritated people who believed that morals went against human nature, or rather, people who were inevitably forced to believe it. Aoko silently walked away without responding to what Sojiro said. Her long hair spun from side to side as she passed him.
大崎
Nothing. Her strangely cold manner, he called out to her. Noting her strangely cold manner. However, she was already opening the door to leave.
下でシャワー浴びてくるから、あなたは自分の部屋に戻ってて。
Her words lacked any expressive inflection. In his confusion, all Sojiro could do was
いい
nod.
けど、やっぱり怒ってないか？
Emotion returned to her face as he spoke. Yes, it was not the typical irritated look to which she had grown so accustomed.
そうね。あんた流に言えば、多分私は怒ってる。何に対してのものかは、あんまり言いたくないけど。
Poor Sojo did not even realize that he himself was the reason. She looked at him, and for an instant he witnessed an emotion on her face on which she had never seen likes before.
じゃあね。これが最後になるかもしれないから、お別れぐらいは言っておくわ。あなたはアリスを甘く見すぎてる。でも、それが同時にあんたの強みなのよね。
The door slammed loudly shut behind her. Her steps were audible as she walked away on the other side of the wall. The corridor must have been nearly freezing without any central heating, but Aoko seemed perfectly comfortable.
なんで私から出ていくんだ。順番が逆。普通先に出てくのはそっちじゃない。
Aoko promptly kicked Sergio out of her room. Once again, the wooden door closed with a slam. The corridor was not as cold as he had expected. Not quite as bad a freezer at least. Oh, wie geil. The second day of exams ended, and Sergio was on his way back to the mansion. The road grew steeper and the woods thicker as he made his way up the familiar slope. People in town called it not a hill but a mountain, simply because it took over 20 minutes to climb. This did not sit well with Sergio, for whom a mountain was something that could not be overcome so easily. The road was paved for one thing, and the canopy overhead let in plenty of sunlight to guide the way. None of the inclinities were especially steep, and no animals lurked in the underbrush. There was no chance of losing his way, no reason to worry about getting lost.
情けない。まだ未練ばっかりだ。
Sergio quietly reprimanded himself for getting so wrapped up in his own little world. In the past few weeks since moving here, he had been constantly comparing the town with his former mountain home. Normally he would not get upset over it, but in recent days, since meeting Aoko, as it happened, he had become rather hung up on the differences. The reason for this eluded him, but he knew that Aoko was a force that could not be stopped. This naturally made him want to quicken his own pace. The mansion where they both lived was the antipathy of her lively personality. It stood out like a sore thumb, even in a town like Misaki. Some people said it was haunted. There were no ghosts, per se, but it was inhabited by magicians, so their claims were closer to the truth than they could have possibly known.
そういえば、幽霊と魔法使いっていうのは、どっちが常識外れなんだろう。
Okay, auch schöne Überlegung, egal. Lost in contemplation as he was, the boy failed to notice how his own lack of familiarity with city life played into the equation. In any case, none of his pondering changed what needed to be done. Tomorrow was the last day of exams. That meant he only had a little longer until Aoko stopped taking responsibility for his safety. If possible, today was going to be the day when the mansion's owner accepted his continued residence there. Sergio slipped between the trees, encircling the mansion, and walked down the naturally tree-lined avenue that led him to the front door. Taking a deep breath, he stepped across the threshold. The drawing room was where he expected to find Alice. However, he found himself face to face with a most unexpected scene. A few steps in, he arrived at the large foyer extending from the mansion entrance. But one thing was clearly out of place. The foyer of the mansion was like a hall in a medieval castle. It was illuminated by the cold winter sun casting down through the skylight, unaided by artificial light. Ich glaube, ich sehe da Alice. The wooden tiles made out of the orders. And there was Alice, dressed all in black, huddled against the columns so enormous it resembled a sharply cornered tree trunk. The mansion was quite literally supporting her frail body, like a mother's lullaby, or a gently rocking cradle. The heavy atmosphere within this old building suppressed even the slightest stir, almost as if warding away any disturbance to her slumber. There she slept in the shadows of home, hidden away from outsiders. Her sleeping figure was enough to mesmerize anyone who laid eyes upon her. Sergio instinctively looked up at the ceiling out of sheer awkwardness. He wanted to surprise her, but not in this way. Her slender frame lay asleep by the fireplace. The scene was so beautiful as a painting, yet hard on his heart at the same time. Her slumber seemed breathless. She was too still, with not even a hint of movement, and yet, slumped against the frigid column under the cold winter sky, happiness appeared to be her blanket. A passerby would not be blamed for thinking she was in that most peaceful state of eternal slumber, death.
Sergio
spoke to himself as he gazed idly upon her, bringing her a blanket or something warm did not so much as cross the boy's mind. Instead, odd as it sounds, the first thing he thought to do was to go prepare some tea. He made sure to be as quiet as possible as he opened the drawing room door. On the table waiting for him were 3 pills. They were the medicine Aoko required him to take every day when he arrived home. Gulping down the vaguely sweet pills and continuing on the kitchen, he selected a box of tea from among the many in the cabinet and brewed enough for 2 people. Alice was still asleep when he returned to the foyer. Careful not to make a noisy crouch close to the ground, he was startled by how cold the floor felt through his pants. He thought it would be warmer here by the fireplace, but then again he recalled how Aoko referred to it as a useless hole in the wall. What was likely the case was that neither she nor Alice knew how to use it properly. Das sieht ja geil aus. After taking the teacups from the tray and placing one in front of each of them, Soichi carefully pulled his textbook on classical literature from his ledger.
怒ってたからな。
He could still see her angry face from this morning. The reason for anger was still as much a mystery as the unusual look he saw briefly come across her face. In any case, one thing was certain: he needed to start studying for tomorrow. Thanks to Aoko's instruction, today's exams went well enough, but tomorrow's would be an even more formidable challenge. After how angry he was this morning, he could not expect her to help him again tonight.
そのくせ点数悪いと怒るし、別に青崎が怒る筋合いじゃないと思う。
He complained under his breath as he cracked open his textbook. Apparently, he intended to spend his time in this fashion until Alice finally awoke. The sound of the pages turning was the only audible noise in the grand hall. There was no tickling of clocks or rustling of leaves to disturb her sleep. After a few hours, Soichi quietly rose to his feet. The light that filled the foyer was beginning to turn from white
そ
to
ろそろ
red.
バイトの時間か。
He glanced again at Alice as he stretched her stiff back. She slept in perfect stillness, just as he had this entire time. Soichi asked his brown in speculation. He had no idea what her normal sleeping schedule was like, so he had no idea as to whether he should wake
い
her.
や、青崎も帰ってくるだろうし。
As if reaching the end of a long train of thought, Soichi gave a quick nod of his head and took his leave of the mansion. Today, work was a shift at the Chinese restaurant in Misaki's shopping district, the Mad Beer. The uniforms had been made by someone with an obvious preference for garish colors. The orange apron was emblazoned with a cartoonish polar bear slashing a rock in two with its powerful claws. The design resembled warning signs about wild animals seen in the mountains and stood out in Misaki for its one-of-a-kind originality. This was the Chinese restaurant, the Mad Beer. Aside from its name and logo, the restaurant was the type of cheap hole-in-the-wall dive that could be found anywhere. It faced competition from the ever-increasing number of chain restaurants, though it had managed to last longer than other dining spots, having received rave reviews on a regular basis. Mad Beer prioritized the personal touch, working on its local client, OL, and thus made a point to offer home delivery. It had earned the affectionate monikers QKS, the Quick Killer Stop. Making these deliveries was Soichi's responsibility for time being. Places in Misaki within cycling distance fell under his domain. Anything beyond that was handled by a more experienced staff member on the legendary 50cc King Simon motorbike, but anyway.
ヤシロギのダチから聞いたんだけどな。
Ich würde sagen, an dem Punkt will ich jetzt diese Folge einfach mal beenden. Vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen und bis zum nächsten Mal. Ciao!